Hey everybody, it's Uncle Matt's RPG Studio. This is Uncle Matt's D&D Neighborhood, where we talk with people who in the gaming community who are famous or who ought to be. And today I have somebody who's sort of in that middle category. He's in the process of becoming famous in 3D printing, and that is Ian Lovecraft. Ian, say hello to everyone.
Hi there. How are you guys doing? Glad to be on your show, Matt.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you on the show. And just want to remind everybody, if you haven't already subscribed to the show, please subscribe to the show. And also, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/Uncle Matt. And with that, we move into talking with Ian. And so just a quick pressy on Ian. He's a 3D designer. He sells the 3D sculpts, the STL files, via Kickstarters for the most part. He does have a store for things that people have already had. So what people have already gone through the Kickstarter for. So our objective here is basically to sort of let him talk about his product line, and I have questions, like I always do for people, about how that's done. And I want to make one other point that I think a lot of people know, but I don't take money from people who are doing Kickstarters. This is not a sponsorship thing. This is usually me just finding people who are out there, because a Kickstarter is a great time to focus in on somebody, because they're also focused in, and they're focused in on what they're, by definition, what some of the most important stuff to them about gaming is. And so Kickstarter is a good time for that. And so, Ian, you're running a Kickstarter right now. Give me a real quick description of what it is you've got up right now.
Well, it's called Riders of the Storm, and I really think it rocks. So I want you guys to learn about it. That's why I'm here. I really want to do a big shout out to all you guys out there. And basically, talking with Matt now, I want to show you all the main points of that Kickstarter, and hopefully try to convince you to at least have a look at my wares,
The 3D printing market for the STL files. Anybody who's not familiar with what we're talking about, first off, this probably isn't your interview anyway, because you don't have the stuff for it. But if you are familiar with what we're talking about with 3D printing, what is sold there is what's called an STL file, which you put into your computer. You do another thing to it called slicing, and then you send it over to your 3D printer, and it makes a thing. You have some things. Hold up one of your things for people to see, Ian.
Plenty of stuff here. Well, you can actually see this one is a two-part. Let's see if I can fit it into the camera. This is a two-part piece. This is I call it a tree house. I don't know if you can actually see it. There.
Yeah, I think we got a good enough view of it. And the reason
that model over there. Then you get figurines, like, for example, this war elephant. This is a historic piece, Carthaginian. I'll turn it around over there.
Which looks like this when it's painted, although this is not a very good print because it flattens some of it out. But there is your Carthaginian war elephant in full display. Now, one of the things, again, if people aren't familiar, the reason that was in that elephant house was in two pieces. Well, we'll show some of the others as we run through. I want to run through some of the categories on your Kickstarter, because you've got an interesting set of categories. So hold on to the figures, and as we get to each one, you can show an actual physical example of what it is that those files do. The reason, for example, that Elven Treehouse was done in two parts, you'll see that with a lot of 3D models, is simply because they only go upward. They can't go up and then back down again when you're printing something. So that's one of the tricks that people use.
Yeah.
All right, so let's before we get to the Kickstarter itself, I've got a question, because I know I asked you beforehand whether you're actively playing or not, and it's been a while. So how is it that even though you're not in the middle of games right now, that you started doing the sculpting for gaming? How did you get into that idea and doing that?
Well, the fact is, I don't really do sculpting for gaming directly. I do sculpting for art. I emphasize on actually producing artwork, and I emphasize on the form and the function. I don't really go for the gameplay straight away. I am in touch with the community all the time, because lots of people can actually see me in the Facebook, and I'm very active. And I always try to learn of all the new games that are out there and see what people are bringing out and what they're sharing on the community. But my main emphasis is actually art and actually getting that form created. That is my main thing.
Okay. That's cool. I saw a thing on YouTube at one point about a guy who's doing the entire setup for Labyrinth, although he's doing resin casting on his. You also do resin casting, right?
Yes, we used to do a Blood Bowl pitch in resin cast. That was our first Kickstarter, and we're looking into other productions. You see, resin casts need molds. So these molds, after a while, expire. So you have to do several runs, and when those molds actually expire, you then have to actually produce more. So you actually have to what would you how do you say it? You have to stagger the production. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Give me one moment. I want to check and see whether I am getting poor reception because of having a carbonite thing going and it's not. So, all right. That's usually something I check ahead of time. Okay, so what do you think, actually, this is a question that's a bit off topic to 3D printing, but what do you think is going to be the effect of 3D printing on people doing resin casting? Because resin is heavy, it's hard to mail, and I believe it's more fragile than a lot of the 3D printing. At least if you drop it, I think if you step on it, it's probably better. But what do you think is going to happen with people who are doing resin casting for the gaming community?
Well, at the moment, there's market for people who actually want resin casts and people who actually do the digital, because there's not enough printers going around. But definitely resin cast and the production of resin has major overheads compared to, for example, the actual designing in digital. Basically, when you design in digital, you actually produce the design, then just make sure everything prints correctly and you pass it on to the customer. But with resin, you actually have to produce the design, then modify that design slightly towards making a really good mold that will last the length for the duration of the run. And then you actually have to ship it to the customer and actually offer it and make sure it gets there in good condition, you know, and that can cause a lot of problems. We've had problems in the past, obviously, because, and it's through no fault of ours. You know, we actually we package the thing really safely, and then, you know, the courier just kicks it around in the truck, and when it gets to the customer, we get all kinds of problems, you know. So
we've seen, well, you may not be familiar with this, but I work with Frog God Games, and we have that problem exponentially larger because what we ship is books, and it is amazing what a postal service can do to a book, even when it is packaged for a war zone. Apparently, we're very upset with Italy for the most part. In Italy, apparently, they really.
Yeah, but I mean, we put all our love into the packaging. We put all that foam in, and we make sure it's really solidly packed. But then we get photographs from our customers. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time. I'd say like 1 in 10, right? But and I guess I've been lucky. But we get photographs back from the customer, and you can see that the box is all caved in on one side, you know, cuts in the box, and you just say, how the hell did this happen? You know, I mean, they should have, and obviously you have your fragile stickers all around the box, you know, which doesn't make any sense at all, you know.
I don't think they pay any attention at all to what the stickers on it say, unless it says hazardous. Maybe they pay attention to that. Okay, so that covers the resin casting, and I was curious because I've been asking a lot of the 3D printing people what they think is going to happen to the markets like you know, Dwarven Forge and Reaper and various other places. I'm hearing that, you know, miniatures are probably going to survive because you're just not approaching the quality yet with 3D printing that those guys get with large scale molding. But that you know, as the 3D printing gets better and better, people are going to start replacing some of those traditional model types.
I've got some minis here which could put an argument against that, you know.
Now hold it very, very still in front of the camera. If you move it at all, it loses focus. All right, and let me switch over to you so that people are seeing it. Okay, so now that is a 3D printed.
A 3D printed
Hastati.
Hastati, that's right. Yeah, that's a Hastati one.
But of course, the issue is that for somebody like me, who is not particularly good at 3D printing. Mine did not turn out that way. I have one somewhere. If I can spot it instantly, I'll show you what one of those figures looks like when it's done badly. And I don't see it at the top of the box of miniatures, but yeah, on mine the spear didn't work out too well, and there were a couple of things, and so it's the mediocre printers who don't really level the bed and get and do all of the work on the 3D printers that that don't come out with something quite as good as what you can probably do because you know how the machines work.
Well, that particular problem you had with the spear, for example, here you can actually see this is the white one is SLA printed, and the blue one is FDM printed. The spear on the blue one suffered a bit of a meltdown, and that's got to do with the fan. So basically, all the little problems you might have when creating the miniature is associated with some technical fault or some lack of from the printer, you know. So it's as you say, you know, you eventually get the expertise, you learn, you practice, and the hobby becomes what it has to become. So it's like, for example, when you're painting a miniature, you see all these pro-painted miniatures on the internet. You buy your miniature, you get the lead figure, you get the paint out, start painting them out.
It's like when you cook and you cook something and it does not look anything like the picture that was in the cookbook.
Yeah, I mean, you put your best effort and love into it, but you know, you do need the practice and the skill to do it. At the end of the day, that's what hobby is about.
Well, I wasn't suggesting. I was not suggesting there was any problem with any of the files that are going in. I think those are as high detail or almost as high detail as the resin. The only thing that's an issue with it is that sometimes having to do it in two parts because of the way that the printer does, which isn't an issue with the mold. What I'm looking at is the fact that there is a differentiation in quality, not because of the files, but because if I go out and buy you know, a resin, plastic, or metal miniature, they already will have discarded the ones that weren't any good. Whereas if I'm printing it on my 3D printer, I'm occasionally going to get things like my flat-headed Carthaginian elephant. But
well, the thing is that with a 3D digital file, you can just keep on trying. You know, if you go to the shop, buy your miniature, you know, I mean, it's going to set you back €4, €5, €6 or whatever, or dollars. But with the digital file, it's going to cost you $2, $3, and you just keep on trying. And eventually you'll get it, I assure you. It's not that difficult. There's lots of communities out there that can actually help you. We give a lot of support to people. We want people to learn. We want people to print them out properly, you know. And on top of that, you can actually print more of them. So, for example, this regiment figure, you only buy once. But you obviously can, once you get it right, you can print out hundreds of times. So there are obvious benefits there, you know. So
there are huge benefits. I mean, I think over time, I think two things are going to happen. I think that those printers are going to get better, and they're going to get more idiot-proof, so that somebody like me will in general be able to get better miniatures. And then simply the cost, the very, very low cost, and as you said, the ability to repeat a print if something goes wrong, I think is going to cause serious problems for everybody, but probably the specialty metal people. I think that those guys, you know, somebody who has done the masses of things, you know, like Reaper would be in trouble, except that Reaper is using plastic now and it's pretty good. But like Games Workshop, I think they're in serious trouble over the next few years.
Decade, perhaps. You know, we'll talk back in a decade and we'll probably see a complete overhaul of the hobby.
I agree.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think metal, although gives you a lot of quality and a lot of pros, is, I think, on its way out because it's difficult to handle, ship. It's expensive to ship, and it's expensive to actually produce. So when you are confronted with a 3D replicating machine that can actually produce miniatures, I mean, now we're talking hobby standard, but I am in touch with the industry, and I know what these machines can actually do at an industrial standard. And I can tell you that many of these companies, you mentioned Reaper Miniatures, they're actually 3D printing virtual files to produce physical models to then actually mold and produce the resin cast models you actually buy. So that makes you think, you know, I mean, it's just a question of having the right technology at home to be able to do what they are doing.
Right, I agree. I agree. You know, and again, the printer that I've got is basically bottom of the line. I'm using an Ender 3,
Hey, I
which
can
if
understand.
yeah, if you guys if I still have anybody who's not doing 3D printing, who for some reason is still watching this video, the Ender 3 is a very, very inexpensive machine. It's about $220 American, and it really does a very, very adequate job. In fact, it's great for terrain, and it is pretty good for miniatures. So,
I'd say it's one of the best for miniatures at the moment. It's only about $200. You could say it's bottom of the range, but not in quality. It's definitely very high
no, that's
quality.
right. It's as good as the It's as good as the $500 printers that other companies have.
On my Ender 3, after spending the $200, I just changed the stepper motor on it because it was under extruding a bit. So that was like $40, $50 more.
Mm-hmm.
And it's printing better than my $1,000 printers that I had before. So, you know, I mean, I have no complaints on it. Definitely a great machine.
What's happening with mine right at the moment, and talking about, and again, folks, talking about problems with these printers does not mean not to get a printer. But they say if you're not somebody who already owns a toolbox, wait a little while before getting a printer, because you do have to have a toolbox. But mine right now is only going on the z-axis. It's only going a certain amount up, and then it's apparently starting to slow down as it goes up, and then stops at a certain point. So when you're back in Houston, we'll have coffee, and I'll bring my printer, and you can look at it.
Definitely, yeah, I'll definitely do that. I already more or less know what the problem could be. So
okay, now let's move on back to your Kickstarter, because that was what I really want to highlight here for people is the variety of different things that people are doing. And I've already had Jordan from Hobgoblin, and I've forgotten his last name, Knights, I think. Yeah, I've had him on the show. I've had Tom Tullis on the show, and there is a very wide variety, William Walker also, very wide variety of what people are doing. And now in your Kickstarter, you usually have a lot of variety, but two of your past ones have been very focused on cities. You did one that had a very Mesoamerican feel, which was the one also where you had your Blood Bowl pitch, and then you did one on Rome, which is where I have the Carthaginian elephant from. That's one of the ones that you get in the Rome pack. Now this one you're going a bit more into the true fantasy realm, with the dragons, the elves, dwarves, and so on. Let's run through in order. In the dragons, for example, you have three different versions that you're distinguishing. That the dragons have. There's a role-playing version, there's a diorama version, and there's a war game version. Now, in my head, I immediately get an idea of, yeah, those are three different things where the models are going to need to look different in terms of how they're used. Describe for me in the dragons section, what's the difference between the role-playing version, the diorama, and the war game?
Well, this is one of the areas where we actually get in touch with the actual backer, the person actually going to use the models, and we try to see how my design can fit the needs. Because it basically doesn't fit the needs, they're not going to want the product. So this is one of the main issues, and this is a perfect example of how we actually addressed this and produced a design for each type of playing environment. For example, the war games dragon versions have smaller bases, which allow it to be compatible with Warhammer and all the War Machine and all the other type of games out there, the tabletop war games out there. The role-playing version, for example, has slight differences in the design. It doesn't have a saddle, so basically it's not a mounted dragon. It's a dragon more au natural. No? It's a sort of a natural dragon. It's like in the wild, and it's in a natural environment where the dungeon master can actually just throw it at the players, and the players can actually go around it. It has a round base as well, so you can actually interact better with the dragon. And then there's the diorama.
That is a big one, isn't it? Because the standard for the role playing miniatures is a round base, and on almost all war games, you've got square bases so that you can handle facing.
There are big differences which we felt we really needed to address. Although I feel that it's made the Kickstarter a little bit more confusing than I wanted it to. It's also giving it a lot of diversity, and if people really go in and know how to pick, they have a very good product they can use with the games there, definitely. The last one was the Diorama I wanted to talk about. The Diorama is a fantastic rendition of the actual dragon version. It's the one I like the most because it actually allows me to express the art and the form of the dragon. I have, for example, I love this one, so I have to show this one off. This is the fairy dragon.
Can you hold that a little further back from the screen?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, there we're getting a better focus on it. Okay, so there's the fairy dragon. If you turn it,
dragon, and it's sort of like feeding on the pollen of the flower there. So this is just great to actually paint up and put on a mantelpiece. So, you know, for painters and people who just enjoy sculptures, that's actually great. It actually prints in 2 parts, so it really looks confusing, but it actually prints in 2 solid pieces. On the actual Kickstarter, I have samples of the actual print. You see, it actually keys in. If I can actually show you, can you actually see the keys?
Yes.
Yeah. In the Kickstarter, there are actual examples of the printed product, and then how actually prime it and paint it.
Okay, and I'd like to go back to the Kickstarter page in a bit, and because since you raised that question of what is it that people see on a Kickstarter, is it too complicated? I will go through and give you my thoughts on whether it is too complicated, because I am the perfect consumer. I only barely know how to use my printer. I use it for to print certain things, and I'm not all that terribly experienced, and so I'm the perfect person to look through the Kickstarter page and say, yes, this is terribly confusing, or yes, this is clear. But let's go, before we do that, let's go through what the other categories are, because you have heroes and you have regiments. And tell me what the difference is between a figure that you're designating as a hero and the figures that you're designating as regiments.
No. This sort of spans up to back to Games Workshop in the 1990s, where they used to have like the command figures. They used to have the major hero, the lesser hero, the musician, and the standard bearer. So it comes from there, basically. But basically, the hero pack, you can use any of those miniatures as part of the regiment or on its own for role-playing needs or whatever, or for painting. So the hero pack actually are separate miniatures, and then the regiments are composed of a standard bearer, a musician, and 6 infantry types, making a total of 8 infantry figures.
And you have regiments for the different fantasy races divided out in there, from what I could see. So you've got a
well, we only had time, and I'm glad actually I didn't include any more regiments because it was getting a bit confusing. We only included 2 regiments, which was the Dwarf Regiment and the Imperial High Elf Regiment.
Okay.
And basically, it's 8 miniatures for the Imperials, 8 miniatures for Dwarfs, each with the command figures. Plus, then there's a hero pack, which is separate from the regiment, which is 8 hero miniatures.
And the reason it's important how these are grouped is because people have some ability to pick different specific packs in the tiers of the Kickstarter, right?
Yes, you have different pledges, and you can actually choose if you want the actual regiments or you just want the heroes. Again, we go back to whether you're actually role-playing or you're wargaming. I felt that people would perhaps want to actually buy the buildings and not the heroes, and not the regiments or the dragons and not the heroes, etc., etc. So basically, we give a lot of options. We have all the pledges for what I believe are the main core packs that the people will want. But additionally, we've also added add-on value. So you can easily choose one pledge and then add on any of the packs you want yourself to your original pledge.
Okay, so and we'll get to how that works too as we go over the Kickstarter page. And then so you've got the dragons, the heroes, the regiments, and then you have Bridgeton, which is my favorite part of the Kickstarter, and that is terrain buildings, and they're in my favorite architectural style, which is the sort of Russ Nicholson white dwarf crazy, somewhat crazy, grotty, gothic Tudor kind of appearance. There's nothing. No, there are very few straight lines. It looks like it was built by people who were slightly drunk.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely went for that look. Actually, it was originally based on the old London Bridge idea, the medieval, really old London, which actually collapsed and was destroyed and replaced. But basically, the idea came from there, and I wanted to produce like a den of thieves, a rickety sort of environment. Again, there for role playing, for modelers, for wargaming as well. Makes a great centerpiece. I've got a little building here, so I can explain a few things for it. This is a sample I have. Yeah, that's one of the houses that actually goes on top of the bridge, but you can actually use this house on its own on the tabletop. And the house actually splits up into the printable parts, but not only that, you can actually, let me see, you can actually see inside, you see? This is a 12mm scale. So you might think, oh, my miniatures aren't going to fit in there. But obviously, you can print them up to 28, 32mm scale. And you can see you've got an inside play area. And it just sort of fits back in there.
And all the one thing about the buildings is they all have that arch so that you can put them in a line on a bridge.
Right. Yes, you can put all the houses, you can use the houses separate from the tabletop, or you can actually put it on the bridge. There's an archway that actually passes through, so you can actually have all your miniatures passing through underneath. There are also gantries which interconnect the houses on a second layer level. And on the houses, actually, there are some balconies on the outside, which I put in to make it more interesting. And you can remove the roofs to actually have a role-playing element inside. So it makes for great little campaigns on Den of Thieves and sort of going in there, you know, with a party. You can really work that out for a great campaign.
Because when I looked at that too, my first instinct was not, oh, I will line these up on a bridge the way that they're supposed to be lined up. My first instinct was, aha, this is the first set of buildings I've ever seen that does what was often done in medieval cities, which was to have arches over streets, not just a bridge. But nobody has done anything where you have one of these buildings that crosses another street. So my thought was, I'll put my houses, and then there's something from Bridgeton here that spans over the road, and then houses until I get to the next place where that goes. So I really liked the design concept on Bridgeton. Unfortunately, the city that I'm really putting the effort into right now is more of a Middle Eastern feel, which this isn't going to fit into. But for almost everybody who is doing cities is going to be using the Bridgeton type of architecture, the Tudor England. So that's worth taking a look at. And I will show some of the pictures on that because I'm going to share my screen with the Kickstarter link.
That's something I wanted to talk to you about, perhaps a little bit later on when the conversation leads us there. Why does everybody use the medieval type of, you know, Dark Age, medieval European type in their actual campaigns? Because I had this problem with the Rome Kickstarter. When I brought the Rome Kickstarter out, people were saying, great stuff, really love it, Ian, but I really don't know how to fit it into my campaign, you know? And I'm thinking, well, Rome's been around for 2,000 years. It's gone through the medieval period, Romanesque or whatever, you know? It's just and it's fantasy anyway. So why don't you actually manage to fit it in? And to my satisfaction, some people actually did, and then they showed me and they changed the campaign. So it's something I wanted to bring up now because I think that people should open up their perspectives to new themes and new types of environments, especially.
And I should point out, though, that there are some people, the people who are looking for something different. I mean, I was looking for sort of North Africa was the template that I'm mentally using for mine. But of course, the Rome set, I bought the entire Rome set because it has so many of the same features. I mean, you've got a similar climate, you're going to have similar architecture in many ways. And so, although I couldn't use everything on Rome because I was sort of staying away from the classical pillars, the low tiled roofs that weren't pitched at an angle to get rid of snow.
This one. It's time.
Hold that a little further back.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. See what that does is, let me actually, I can show
Yeah, it's multi.
Let me see if I do have something with a pitched roof.
That
That'll
one was
do.
quite interesting because it was like a multi-block, a Lego type of thing, and you could actually lift them all up to produce a really nice multi-level city.
Yep. Now I've got. I can't get down to any of my actual Rome roofs because they've fallen down to the bottom of the box because they are smaller. But just to show an example, these are actually both from the same company. But here, for example, I need to click on this thing. All right, so here, for example, is the difference that I'm talking about between a pitched roof. This is sort of modeled on French buildings where you need the sharp pitch to throw off snow. This is a more Mediterranean look where it's obviously not as important that you're getting rid of that precipitation because it won't collapse the roof. And in North Africa and in Rome, in many cases, you actually had completely flat roofs.
That's right.
And the thing is that this, when you are building a city, even though the player may not know that a pitched roof is there to throw off snow or excessive rain, it's still going to look wrong when you have things that are vastly different. And so I bought the entire Rome set, even though some of the things I wasn't going to use. And you've got your Mesoamerican set as well, which is even further off the beaten path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we decided to go for that because there was no one actually doing anything like that, and there's so much beauty in that. I mean, we've got some pieces over here. This is the water screw, one of my favorite pieces.
That is a beautiful piece.
Yeah. Basically, I call this architectural farce because, I mean, you can't really have it in real, but it has its sort of foundation in science and in history,
Yeah.
The watermill, all the other bits and constructions. It's basically it has its sort of roots in reality, but you take it to another level with fantasy. That makes it interesting.
Now, I think that I mean, here's my theory about why everyone uses that Tudor architecture. Dungeons and Dragons sort of started out at a point in time where there wasn't a lot of literature in the fantastic realms. And Dungeons and Dragons almost created, it almost became self-referential. Pictures from the original books began to reappear, and it just, Tudor England became the, both from Tolkien, the Arthurian tales, it just became the default. And now we're in a position in time where where someone like you, if you are thinking about how do I hit the largest, how do I supply the largest number of gamers who are looking for something, you get on the Facebook group for Dragonbite and Dragonlock, which is the, again, the Fat Dragon Games thing where you spend a lot of time. And you are hearing people's comments. Well, the largest number of those people are going to do exactly what you were talking about. They're going to say, oh, well, Rome, I can't put that stuff next to my weird looking Tudor village and get something that looks right. I would have to do I would have to do a lot of printing, and printing is slow right now. And I think that's why people have that. And it's not just in printing and structures. I mean, if you look at almost any fantasy video game, Skyrim, whatever it might be, they're also following that same, The Witcher, although The Witcher had some reasons for doing that. It's set in Poland. But anyway, I think that's sort of where it shakes out.
Yeah, well, I mean, before, if you're using resin, it's very expensive, and obviously it demands quite a setup. But now with 3D printing, I know you actually have to print everything, and it's hours of printing, and then you actually have to paint the thing. But it's more accessible to change at the moment now with 3D printing. So I think we should open people's perspectives up and slowly try to get them playing in different environments, definitely.
And I think that'll work. Precisely because of what you just said. The buildings are very inexpensive now. The cost out of your pocket to decide that you're going to do something in the Roman Empire or something that is set in a jungle using Mesoamerican type of architecture, I think more people will be trying that over the course, again, of the next decade that we're looking at. So let's go, and I'm going to share my screen. And I do have to sort of remember how to do this because on Skype it's only a one-button press. There we go. All right, screen share. Share. Riders of the Storm. We should be looking. Is what you're seeing?
Yes.
Ian,
Yeah, I'm seeing that. Yeah,
Kickstarter. Okay.
that's
So let's
right.
go up to the top.
Yeah.
And I see that you've already created 4 Kickstarters. That is a good thing for people to know because you've delivered on your promises before and been able to organize it and do it.
That's right.
Let's go through and look. Here's a few of the printed dragons, which is nice. The painted dragons. Why is my cursor?
Those were actually digitally painted.
Uh-huh.
That is sort of something new going on now, because if you actually 3D print and you don't want to send off to a pro painter to actually get your thing painted out, it also makes sense to actually just digitally paint it. So this is a new thing I was trying out on the actual dragon thing.
Yeah, it looks like it worked very well. They look nice.
Yeah, it gives you a very nice illustration of what the dragon could actually look. Then I have a few painted examples as well, so that people can actually tell the difference. Actually, another important thing to watch here is the actual video. If you press play, a whole animated video, a 2-minute animated video actually plays through.
And I will let people the link everybody to this Kickstarter page is in the description down right below the video. So if you are interested in seeing the actual video play, then you can go ahead and click that and do the video. I'm not going to do it because I have no idea what would happen if I'm playing a video in a video.
Well, that video actually is rendered and hand-drawn animated sequences. I was also trying out that for this Kickstarter. You know, it was a bit rough, but it worked out. So who knows? In future Kickstarters, I might actually be able to use this technique with a higher quality.
Nice. All right, let's scroll through, and I'm a buyer. Okay, so I look through in here, and I see, yeah. So I see what I'm getting. I see that it's 3D printing. 3D printing being the most important thing for me to see right away. And then again, you do have a tendency to do very, very large Kickstarters in terms of the number of files. But I think this does a good job here of Dragons, Heroes, Regiments, and Terrain of telling me what I'm going to need to scroll down to learn about. So we start with dragons. I look through on dragons. I've got good pictures.
Those are some samples.
More videos.
Yeah.
This is where it possibly gets a little bit confusing, which is where the subset of dragons going into the roleplay version, diorama, and wargame version. But let's see. You have here's Viper wargame, Viper RPG. So you've given good pictures of what it is that's the difference between the wargame. Here he is with a square base. The RPG version here he is with a smaller and round base, and also the base
scale as well on the side.
Yep. Is the scale different?
Yes, each different sized dragons. Yeah, so more or less gives you an idea what you're getting.
And then we here have the diorama where he's down. So really, these are 3 different figures. The fact that you're saying that they're 3 different uses, really, the person who's getting them is getting 3 different figures for that.
Yes.
Okay. And then here we go. We've got the fairy dragon broken down, arrowhead broken down, Ragnarok broken down, bullhead broken down. Here is where the choices come in.
Right. Yeah. You might want to know a bit about that.
Okay, I totally don't understand. If you're looking at complexity, I do not understand what's happening here in backers' choice. I mean, I understand I can vote, comment, choose stuff for the dragon models before the end of the campaign, but it doesn't show me really how to do that. So that confuses me.
Okay, fair enough.
This is a very good section. This, but I agree you should have the painted one ahead. So. Are these question marks because of the backer's choice or the question?
Right, yeah. Okay. Basically, we keep the same version dragon, but the backer chooses the pose. Okay. And that's going to happen in the last week of the campaign through polls and product updates.
Okay. Then we go to the heroes. We have the same breakdown that you did with the dragons. We've got the nice painted pictures of it, and a backer's choice.
There you can see the add-on, so you can actually choose a different pledge and then choose different packages.
Let me take a look at the tiers that you have set up here. All right, so you've got pledge €1, and then you can get add-ons. Are you using backer kit at the end?
No.
Okay, so you're just doing the fulfillment yourself. All right.
Yes.
Then we have a larger pledge where they're getting regiments and heroes. We have one at the same price where they're getting Bridgeton, so you can choose between terrain or a miniature setup. Then we have a higher price one here where they're the dragon sets. Here is where there are, I'm looking over here, by the way, if anyone's following that. We've got Bridgeton plus a couple of the add-ons options that are there, and we'll see these down at the bottom, the House of Hookah and the Tower Keep. And then we have the all-in sort of stuff. All right, so it's divided into these groups for purposes of the tiers. Let's go back down to where we were. Here's our heroes with the nice pictures. Then we go to the regiments. This picture is confusing here because it doesn't have any description of it. It's always, I think, okay, there are FDM and SLA samples. You know, the different type of material being used, people like me were using just regular, you know, the SLA filament. I'm not going anywhere near, so that's probably less of an issue than what the figures look like. So here's my dwarf regiment. Very nice. Here's my Imperial Elven regiment. And here we get to Bridgeton, again, my favorite part. You can see the complete set here. You've got a simplified combination. Obviously, you can put them together in all kinds of different ways. Here we see 5 types of buildings. And here we've got each one with the example and the painted. I had a question. The way that you do this brown with the detail, is that painted white and then stained with furniture polish, or is it, how did you do that? Because it's kind of nice looking.
Well, that's a secret. I can't actually tell you. No,
okay.
No, joking.
If you told me, you'd have to kill me.
No, that's actually a ray traced render.
Okay.
So it's not a real, but obviously it's ray traced. We have a small render farm. Actually, one of those pictures takes about 24 hours and like 4 or 5 computers whirring around to produce one of these ray traced images.
Interesting.
Well, it depends on the size of the image, obviously. But
and are these here digitally painted, or are these physically?
So that's the one I actually showed you, which is.
I thought it might be.
Yeah, the one over here. And we want to have more examples. We're preparing up some more examples on the houses of Bridgeton, how they actually are taken apart, and you can actually look inside them and show the gantries and balconies I talked about. But it's still in process. We intend to have everything put up for the last week of the campaign, definitely, so that people know what they're getting into and see examples.
Here we see more of the ray traced
houses. We will be able to see inside, and hopefully I'll paint them up. And they are ray traces, as you say, yes.
Neat. Okay, so here we have more ray tracing. And again, like I was talking about, you can have a street go through these, especially this one down here on the bottom. But I like the look of the smaller arch, too. Of course, many of those cities actually did have some of those arches to control the movement of the population. They could use it in case of riots to close off parts of the city. So here we have again, and it's this sort of rickety Tudor Gothic look to it going through those. And now here we are in some of the add-ons, although you can put those into the tiers. House of Hookah, obvious where the inspiration came from for that one. And then we have a Tower Keep, which is, again, follows that sort of rickety Gothic aesthetic, but it does not have the hole through the middle, so you could use that in combination. Then you've got add-ons from prior campaigns, and so here's the Mesoamerican one, here's the Rome one, and so that and then the list of stretch goals, and everybody expects to see the list of stretch goals, locked or unlocked. So this is very familiar to Kickstarter buyers. Let me scroll. So some of these we really haven't seen before, because here's the tree house, which you showed us.
Yes, it is true.
Okay, and then the dwarf war blimp, which is going to be very impressive, and production examples. Okay, so and you also listed some collaborators. How are what is it that the collaborators do with you? The folks that you gave credit down at the bottom of this.
Right. The main collaborator was Paul Deeming from Wow Buildings. He helped me with the actual modeling of Bridgeton. He actually produced the modular version of the bridge, the underlying bridge. There's also a mortar and a large artillery piece, which he did a lot of that. But it's interesting because we actually got together, both of us, and he modeled the structure, passed on the unfinished model to me, and I sculpted and finished the details on it, basically. So it's a new way of doing things. It's definitely co-sculpting.
I should have asked Jordan and Tom. I mean, I know William Walker works alone on it. Well, no, he doesn't either. It seems like a lot of people have some sort of division of labor on this stuff, but it's a different. They divide it differently into, you know, to whatever seems to match the collaborators. But very few people, I guess, have all of the skills to do an A+ job on every bit of things, and so.
Yes.
Okay, that covers the stuff that I wanted to cover in terms of letting people see this is what you've got out there, so that we've got a few videos, or that I have a few videos on the channel of the different approaches that are taken by different sculptors on the whole thing. What else do you think is important to talk about, either in terms of the market, or in terms of the sculpts, or in terms of what you've got on your Kickstarter? What else would you like to add?
Well, I think we've gone through the Kickstarter, I mean, in detail. Basically, we also talked about how I think people should open their perspectives now that there's a lot of medium out there to be able to use in your games. So definitely that is something I really want people to actually open up to, and also open up to the fact that this is not only just model making and making of adult toys, practically. This is, for me, it's an actual art form. When I actually sculpt something, I express my feelings for that product, for that form, and it's very important to understand that it's art. And there is a difference between actual modeling and sculpting. Modeling is more of a design process, and sculpting is more of an artistic process. People also have to understand that, because people just say, you get a lot of people talking in the community, and they say, oh, this sculptor or that sculptor, when you know that that person is not really a sculptor, is a modeler. The difference between modeling and sculpting is what design and art is in the counterpart of design and art. You have to understand these things, and to actually understand that the whole thing is an art form and a way to express the products I'm actually creating.
Now, that's an interesting point too, because I would say, also that, and I actually use this stuff on videos, but even if it were just on a tabletop, the selection of the different models and the painting of the different models is also designed, at least in my case, where there is to, I'm trying to create a city that pulls in a North African and a swords and sorcery vibe that's very different from the sort of Tudor England thing. So there is a secondary spin-off art form for the people who are using the products that you're coming up with, in terms of their decisions about how to combine the different pieces, how to paint them, to have that all together too. And in my case, it's clearer that it's an art thing, because I'm actually driving a camera through it and you're seeing it from the perspective of the miniatures. But no matter how simple you may be aiming at, even if it's just to have a few buildings out there for a game, there's still an artistic factor involved. for the user as well.
Yes, a major artistic factor. From the moment you make your decision of buying a miniature or a model to bringing it home, printing it out, painting it, I mean, it's all art, it's all design, it's all creativity. And I work from the point of view of the art form and not really the game form. I actually have I make the form, I create, and then try to link it up and use it in the actual games, and try to come across with the people in the community to be able to make it work for them. But I'm more of an artist than an actual gamer.
What? But tell me a little bit more about where you see the difference between the art format and the gaming format. You have a. Tell me more about that. What's the difference?
Well, basically, when you actually make a miniature, I make a miniature because I enjoy its form. Somebody else who's more game orientated will actually make the miniature because it's what they need, what they need to play that weekend with the game partners. You see, so it's basically a question of need. My need is an artistic expression, and their need is really a gaming need. You see. So it is important for me, though, to be able to express myself through art and make these forms, but also keep in touch with the community and fulfill the gaming needs as well. You know, I mean, I'm not just going to shoot off and start doing any kind of art, because that wouldn't do, of course.
Well, I mean, there is one sense in which that artistic approach directly affects gaming without even thinking about the gaming, because I think most people who use miniatures, you know, for example, a lot of the adventure design that I do for the games that are going to be at my table, I look at, and it does, you know, obviously I'm designing something new, but part of it, the areas maybe where I don't have the primary creative force going, I look at what monsters have I got in the box, what buildings have I got in the box, what print files have I bought in the past where I haven't printed something yet, what does Reaper Miniatures have for sale that's a Bones miniature that I can get for cheap, and I sort of have this set of resources that, granted, if I were not playing with miniatures, I'd be freer on this, but since I do, it de facto takes place. I have a catalog of things that will greatly affect what I'm going to do. And what you're doing from the artistic sense is creating new things that are going to be most likely different from what I need this week, because usually what I need this week is going to be orcs, or it's going to be something that's not necessarily unusual. Whereas in your case, you've created for me the ability to say, you know what, we're going to go into the jungle, and the architecture is going to be Mesoamerican that I'm going to use. And I've got that option, which I probably wouldn't if there were not people who were approaching it from that artistic perspective. If it was all, what am I going to use next week? There's not going to be any new stuff.
Yeah, I basically take my inspiration from nature and architecture. So basically, when I'm actually making terrain and organic forms, I actually go out and walk around the countryside, and you know, I'm really in touch with nature, and I really learn from nature, and I try to take that into my actual products. When I'm doing buildings and terrain, I take from history, from architecture, and from real constructions, you know. So I'm borrowing from that. And then I bring all of that together, make interesting things, mix it up in my creative pot, and try to fit that into the gaming territory.
Now, you and I are both from Houston, Texas. And what that tells me is that you must leave Houston a lot if you want to see nature or interesting
Yes,
buildings, because there is very little nature left here, and there are no interesting buildings.
And if it stays out in the sidewalk for too long, it just roasts and toasts. So
why does this dragon look like an oil derrick?
Yeah, well, originally I was born in the UK, you know, and I've been traveling a lot since then. And as I've explained in my Kickstarter, because people actually ask, you know, I do have a workstation in Houston, but I also have a workstation in Europe, you know, so I do travel a lot. I do travel a lot around. And when I refer to going to the forest and being one with nature, that sort of thing, is basically in places where you can actually do that. You know what I mean? But yeah, Houston is it's a bit tough for that.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a place where there are some trees. It's an arboretum, and you can go there, and all of the trees are straight up and down pine trees. So it's, even then, you know, doing our best, but it still doesn't quite hit the fantasy.
Yeah, but I mean, you can still get a lot of inspiration from the housing, from the shopping malls. I mean, the structures. You know, any little thing that you actually observe and study will actually give you its little clues and details that you can later use to make your own models. You know, I mean, you can always find clues here and there wherever you are.
I had an interesting thing when I was doing before I was doing 3D printing. I was doing Hearst Arts modeling, which is where you are molding, usually using plaster, although you could use resin if you wanted to mess up your molds, but usually in plaster, building elements. And so there would be parts of arches and things like that. And I learned a great deal about why a building might look realistic or not, because they many of the things you might want to do will fall down. And again, people will recognize that, even if they're not an engineer or anything like that. They will take a look at something and it will be subtly wrong in some way, just like the pitched roof next to the flat roof. Someone will say that doesn't look quite right. And
Right. Yeah.
so architectural forms. Yeah, go ahead.
It's, in a way, that sort of meets what I was saying before about the architectural farce, but there has to be some kind of logic to it, you know? You get little things from here and there, and you follow the theme, and you come up with your own fantasy version of it, you know? But it has to have its roots in reality and in some form you've studied previously. So that's why you have to actually look at architecture and nature as a reference. Definitely always work from reference.
Yep. All right, so that we're approaching the end of an hour, and I think we've hit on something that is very, very interesting here, which is the design principles that make a set work and make them work together. And maybe in some future video we can do that. When you hit an hour's point on a video, people generally tend to lose focus a little bit unless they're listening while they're doing dishes or something like that, in which case you can go on indefinitely. But I think what I want to do is bring this slowly to a close, since we're at the end of the hour. And I would like to talk a little bit more about that issue of the designing and everything, because when one of the interactions, private message, I think right after I'd bought the Rome set, and you were saying, you know, give me ideas for any other sorts of cityscapes that would be interesting. I mean, I think we do, you know, speaking for the community in general, I think we greatly appreciate the fact that you're going out there and looking for different paradigms, different entire sets that can be brought into the gaming to break it out of the standard thinking, because it's visual. There's no reason, there's no game reason to stick with Tudor England. So you know, I think that it's necessary to have people like you out there and appreciate the fact that you're doing that to expand people's mental vision of fantasy.
Yeah, definitely diversity, and especially now with so much medium at your disposal, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. I mean, when I used to play Dungeons and Dragons, well, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, it was just a piece of paper, pen, and throw dice at each other, you know? Now, I mean, people are playing on top of TFT screens, and, you know, I mean, they have all kinds of aids, game aids, and it's incredible, you know, the advantages. Also, another thing that comes to mind is that when I used to play back in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't a clear set idea of what an orc, for example, looked like, or a troll looked like. When I was 12 and I came across Lord of the Rings, there wasn't any visual reference practically, you know, except for a few illustrations here and there. And you used to get that, your creative users running around your head, trying to picture what you were actually getting from the literature. Nowadays, this past decade, people, you know, they just take what they see on the TV or special effects or whatever, and the series or whatever, to actually know exactly what an orc looks like, what a troll looks like, what this
It looks like you may have frozen up.
We're sort of
There we are. Okay.
which should be more open. You know, it should be more left to creativity and the inspiration of the mind. You know, I mean, we're focusing too much on the media that we're being subjected to. You know, practically. You know, when before it was just like literature, you used to read and your imagination used to run wild. We're losing a lot of that. Basically.
I agree.
Yeah.
We've lost the scary concept of an orc, one that you couldn't see and that you had to imagine yourself. Because, you know, what Tolkien would do is he would just suggest enough that you would put your own worst image of what a goblin, you know, or an orc might look like. Whereas now, I think most people are instantly going to go to something green with tusks. It's big and muscular, which is not even how Tolkien described them.
Definitely not green.
Yeah, they weren't green. They weren't large. Anyway, but let's go ahead and finish it up. Ian, thank you for being on the show. Again, the link to the Kickstarter, if you want to take a look at some of the pieces that he's designed in the way that he's been talking about, I think they look really nice. And we'll go ahead and close it. Say goodbye to all of your fans, Ian.
Well, thanks for being with me and Matt for this hour, and I'd be very happy if you actually take a look at my Kickstarter. I put a lot of love into it, Lovecraft. So basically, it's good to view, and if you come back, even better, you know. But we'll be here, and we'll be exploring all those other terrains and miniatures in future, and hopefully we'll be able to make the fantasies of your creation and mind.
And I will say, in a very similar vein, no matter what kind of Dungeons and Dragons it is that you play, imagine the hell out of it.